Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever you are watching this, know that I appreciate you. I am Coach Jay, also known as Juaitan Robinson, and I am a spiritual life purpose and women's empowerment partner. And what that means in simple terms is that I am a life coach with a focus on women, their pain, their purpose, and their power. I help them reveal, deal, and heal from the pain. I help them refine or define their purpose, and I empower or encourage them to walk that purpose out. And today I'm going to be talking about a topic that, quite honestly, whether I want to admit it or not, is very near and dear to my heart. And it really shouldn't be, but it is. I'm going to talk about fear. I'm going to talk about fear. So, I am experiencing a growth spurt right now. And part of that growth is me learning as much as I possibly can in about as much as I possibly can about having a successful business and being a better person. And with that said, lately I have been hearing the word fear quite a lot, and how we allow fear to stop us from doing things that we want to do. And when I think about fear and how it relates to me and my endeavors, I realize that that fear wasn't so much about being afraid of doing it as much as it was about how people will react to it. My fear was attached to being rejected by those that mattered the most to me. My fear was attached to the verbal and emotional abuse suffered as a child, from being told that I was so smart in one breath and then being called stupid in the next. And then, even as a young adult, I remember a time when I memorized a scripture, um, and this scripture is one of my absolute favorite scriptures because I memorized it on my own. It was the first scripture that I memorized on my own. No one told me that I had to remember it. No one told me that I had to recite this thing in front of some public event. Um, I was in my Bible study as a young adult and came across that scripture, and um, it stuck with me. It stuck with me. But I also remember what happened the first time I quoted the scripture. Now, if you're not a Bible person, if you're not one that really gets into the Bible, you may not understand this. You may not understand how important it is for a Christian, especially coming up when I did in the church that I came up in and in the family that I came up in, how important it is to remember scriptures and why that's so pressed in you. You may not get that, but just trust me in this. It was important that I remembered the scripture. It was important that I quoted the scripture. It meant the world to me to be able to do that. So anyway, I'd gone on a little road trip with a cousin, and if you fast forward a little bit, we met up with one of her friends. Well, I'd gone on the road trip with her. She wanted to visit with a friend at her former college, former university, and to do a few other things, you know. And she had asked if I wanted to come along to keep her company on the drive, and I said, sure, why not? Fast forward a little bit, we meet up with one of her friends, and the three of us are in a dorm room, and the two of them, are having a conversation. And the word fear came up in the conversation. And I proudly quoted 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. And they both looked at me in disbelief, as if I had three heads and I was speaking Greek. Now, I don't know if I misquoted the chapter, the verse, or the scripture altogether, or even if the conversation didn't call for something so deep. But nonetheless, in that moment, a thought that I'd had for a while was reinforced, that I can't be open, I can't share, because if I do, I'll be ridiculed. And just to clarify, if you don't know what 2 Timothy 1:7 is, it's for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And I don't know what happened in that moment, but that thought of being ridiculed surfaced. My fear, I realize now in my 51 years of life for the very first time, my fear is directly attached to my vulnerability. When I first heard God tell me to write a book, I said no. And not just any book, but a book about my life. A book about my life. I said no. And when I finally agreed to write it, I had said to God, and I've talked about this before, I had an ultimatum, not really an ultimatum, but I had some caveats, I'll do this, but that, I agreed to write it, but I said to God, everyone has to be dead or can't remember because what I'm going to write about may cause problems. And that's true. That's true. That is what I was thinking in that moment, but it was all really, and I'll talk about it in just a little bit, all really connected to fear. So fast forward a little bit, my grandparents are gone, all of them, both maternal and paternal. My mom is gone, and my dad is on his deathbed, literally on his deathbed. So I suppose I'd better get to writing, right? But really, what I realized was that the reason I didn't want to write the book is because it displayed me as vulnerable. It opened me up to the world. And the last thing that I wanted to be seen as is weak. The last thing that I want, not wanted, want to be seen as is weak, or to be emotionally attacked, or even more, to be considered a fraud because I'd waited so long to tell my story in full. That same fear is why for so long I couldn't call myself or call what I did coaching, and I couldn't consider myself an actual life coach. And God forbid I should charge for those coaching services. When I looked at my wreck of a life, in my own eyes, my wreck of a life, I didn't think people would believe me. I didn't think that they would take the advice that I was offering or accept that I indeed was equipped and qualified to even disperse this advice. The most important, or the most, that most times I am an expert in the thing that I am speaking about. I was concerned that when I looked at my husband, or when they looked at my husband, or especially my children, they wouldn't take me seriously because what was happening behind closed doors was spilling out. And if I can't keep that under control, or at least under wraps, how could I tell others what to do about their own lives? These same tricks and techniques and guides that I was using with others and telling others to utilize, how could I not apply them to my own life? That's a whole different conversation. But the gist of it is I'm dealing with humans, and humans have free will. And they will do what they want to do despite what you tell them they should do. Plain and simple. But then that scripture comes back to mind. Not only does God not give us the spirit of fear, but he has deposited within us the spirit of power to do whatever it is that he has charged us to do. The spirit of love for ourselves and for one another, and the spirit of a sound mind, or self-discipline, as some versions say. Meaning, as long as I'm in my right mind and it lines up with the mind of God and I follow his lead, I walk in his will, there is nothing at all on this earth, nothing for me to be afraid of. The doubters are going to doubt, the ridiculers are going to ridicule. And those that look at you as if you have three heads and you're speaking in Greek are going to have to watch you as you walk out God's purpose for your life. Now, I hold no grudge against that cousin, her friend, or any other family member or friend of mine that doubted me. I've got nothing but love for them. And in this video, this one right here, I am announcing to you my moving forward despite the fear of being vulnerable, despite the fear of being open and seen by others. Full on, no holds barred. The curtains have completely been removed. You will see everything, or you will hear everything. And I'm doing it in hopes of, one, helping you, but two, making sure that you also see, and that I see within myself, that being as vulnerable and as open as I'm going to be is for my good. My prayer for you is that you do the same, that you walk despite the fear of being vulnerable in your purpose, that you walk despite the fear of being open or even ridiculed in your purpose. That is my prayer for you. So I say, be well, beautiful people. Peace and blessings. Remember to walk in your purpose and know that I appreciate you.